Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, thank you for this invitation to speak at this important seminar on the papal encyclical letter on our common home as we approach COP22 in less than 6 weeks. 28 years ago, the growing awareness of the problem of climate change led to the creation in 1988 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Program. The UN General Assembly in that year, about December, endorsed the establishment of IPCC. Its job is to tell policymakers what we know and what we don't know about the science related to climate change, its impacts and future risks, and options for tackling it. It does this by assessing the wealth of scientific publications in the related disciplines to give policymakers and other stakeholders a picture of the state of scientific knowledge. Since the IPCC, the Climate Panel, has published 5 comprehensive assessments, and we are now preparing to start on the 6th, as well as a series of special reports on particular topics. Our latest assessments, known as the AR5, shows that the impacts of climate change are already being felt in every continent, from the mountains to the seas, affecting rich and poor. But we know that the most vulnerables are also the most exposed, and that there are impacts on food and water, the base as essential the element for life itself. As the 5th assessment report says, limiting the effects of climate change is necessary to achieve sustainable development and equity, including poverty reduction. The first assessment report of IPCC led to the creation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the vehicle for international negotiations to limit global warming. These negotiations have had mixed success, and some people have been frustrated at what they see as lack of progress in handling what can be described as the foremost challenge of our time. But I was surprised at the ambition and the scope of the agreement that emerged from Paris last December in COP21. The Paris Agreement calls for the rise in the global temperature be kept well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to try to keep it to 1.5 degrees. It is noteworthy that the global community recognized the need to aim for a warming limit of 1.5 degrees, however challenging that would be, because of the vital importance that represents for many small island states and many states in the most exposed to the climate damages. This is not abstract science. As a young official from the Vanuatu told me when we met a couple of weeks ago, I quote, 1.5 degrees is about our survival, unquote. COP22 is intended to pursue the actions that will make that ambition reality. Many people have something to contribute. I have just come from a conference in Nantes, France, of non-state actors, where cities and regions, young people, businesses, civil society organizations, and others are discussing what they can do. Our common home provides them with rich material and inspiration, but the main delivery mechanism of the Paris Agreement is commitments by states. The agreement establishes a process for progressively more ambitious efforts to limit greenhouse gas emissions in pursuit of the global warming goal. At the same time, the agreement spells out the need to respond to the threat of climate change in the context of sustainable development and the efforts to eradicate poverty. Countries will submit nationally determined contributions to reduce their emissions that together aim to reach this goal. overall progress will be viewed every 5 years starting in 2018, with commitments ratcheted up if necessary after each such so-called stock take. The IPCC, the climate panel, is responding to this challenge. We are responding to the request of the governments of the UNFCCC to deliver a report on the impacts of 1.5 degree warming and related emissions pathways in 2018 in time for a facilitative dialogue that year on the global stocktake. Second, we are updating the methodologies that countries use to measure and report their greenhouse gas emissions and removals. Third, we will complete our next assessment reports, which is AL6, in 2022 in time for the global stocktake in 2023. And we will put out assessment on a 5-yearly basis thereafter in line with the global stocktake process. And lastly, besides AR6 and the special reports on 1.5 degrees, we will prepare 2 other special reports on climate change and oceans and climate change and land issues. In our last assessment in AR5, IPCC found that to have a good chance of limiting warming to 2 degrees, the world would need to reduce emissions by 2050 by 40 to 70% relative to 2010, and net emissions of greenhouse gases would approach 0 by the end of this century. I must say that we are far from being on track and are rapidly using up the remaining carbon budget that AR5 indicated was available if we are to hold warming below 2 degrees. It is clear that governments will have to be far more ambitious, and action is required urgently if we are to avoid situations where the necessary adjustment threatens sustainable development and poverty alleviation. Climate panel deals in the long-term trends, not short-term data. But the drumbeat of falling weather records and reports of extreme events are a reminder of this urgency. Last July was the hottest month globally since records began. Last August marked the 16th month of record warmth, the longest such track in 137 years. But there are many encouraging signs too. Our common home points to the dangers of untrammeled faith in technology, but it also points to the many benefits that the wise use of technology can bring. We see this in responses to climate change, for instance, in energy production and transport. Improving our understanding of the economics of climate change is crucial. Too often, spending on mitigation or even adaptation is presented as an alternative to development spending. The example I just quoted of air pollution and health should correct this view. The AR5 was clear that the climate change poses a threat to sustainable development and that there are integrated approaches to sustainable development, adaptation, and mitigation. But some people argue that tackling climate change would divert resources from normal economic activity and prosperity, as if business as usual would continue to deliver growth year after year. We cannot really imagine what a world of 4 degree or 5 degree or 6 degree warming would look like. A world where many adaptation options would be foreclosed, but disrupted food production and many ruined lives would surely be part of this picture, as well as devastated economies. Conversely, a world of sustainable development goals of 2 degree warming or less will be very different from what we see now, based on a non-fossil fuel economy with new jobs and economic opportunities. From the examples I've just given, you will see that our research interests have moved beyond traditional climate science. In our next assessment of climate knowledge, following the Paris Agreement, we will place a bigger focus on solutions, and that means a greater emphasis on the social and human sciences. As I've just said, we will need a better understanding of the cost of tackling climate change, but also the needs, also the costs of inaction and of foregone opportunities. We will need to build on the work so far on response options and policy approaches so that we understand what leads to decision making, how effective policies can be adopted, implemented globally and regionally, how communities can be motivated to work with them. We need a better understanding of the reallocation of resources and climate response strategies. To achieve this goal, we now need to make more than ever to improve our understanding of ethical and equity issues. These are some of the key knowledge gaps that I hope the research community will address in the coming years so that we can help policymakers and governments and decision makers at all levels of society to undertake informed actions for climate stabilization and sustainable development. Thank you very much for your attention.